Everybody, welcome back from the break. This is November 28th. It's a Tuesday. Today's discussion is going to talk about the Harlem Renaissance. We're going to get started with this discussion today. We'll do a lot of current events, talking about what happened in the world over the break, talk about some of that. What does that mean? But today's webinar, we'll start off with, today at least, talking about what do you believe Renaissance means? When we look at the term Renaissance, obviously we have a Renaissance fair in Pennsylvania every year. It's a big tourist attraction. But the Renaissance is obviously celebrates something, and I wanted you to think about what it means. We got some definitions throughout, but here's kind of what the dictionary says about a Renaissance. It's a rebirth or a revival of culture, skills, or learning, forgotten, or previously ignored pride. Essentially, you're taking pride in what was something that was previously forgotten, or something that maybe might have been ignored either by you or another group of people. So it's a rebirth in culture. And then when we talk about a Renaissance in the 1920s, it really comes down to the Harlem Renaissance here. So as we discussed in class a little bit today, the Harlem Renaissance is pretty much about how African Americans who are driving the culture forward in the 1920s. You have to understand that African Americans are driving the culture forward about what is new here: the music, the jazz, the dancing, the partying. A lot of things that you see here in this photograph are what drive the 1920s culture forward. The fact that people drank illegally in these places, in these institutions. Sometimes leads America into this new culture, to this new expectation of how you should live your life. Yes, is there a lot of kickback on this? Absolutely. We'll talk more about that at the end of this week and into next week. But at the same time, this rebirth of art, of culture, poetry, literature, music, the ways people that use to express themselves. This rebirth really is pushed and driven by African Americans in the 1920s. And it is something that they take a lot of pride in, and it's also something that gains them a lot of popularity. So we're going to talk more about this here a little bit today. And we do, like I said, we do a lot of current events here after this bell ringer. But we move on to kind of finishing up a review of the worksheet we got last Tuesday, which is the 13.2 guided reading worksheet. Most of you have it. It's a blue worksheet. So if you have that, it's blue. You can look at some of these answers here on the lost generation. But the question for number 4 asked about the lost generation, specifically who were they, what were they trying to do, or like what was their goal. Lost generation are people who felt disconnected from the country and its values. Many people left for Europe than rather live in the U.S. So you can see what their intentions are. Some of these people are Ernest Hemingway, who writes "The Sun Also Rises." It's the first time the lost generation is used in a written word, and it's used from this definition that we see at the very top here about people who felt disconnected from their country. The next writer is F. Scott Fitzgerald, who writes The Great Gatsby, which is essentially a portrait of the 1920s, but it's his view of the wealthy. And at the end, the moral of the story goes, a lot of these people are very, very shallow to get what they truly want most. And they'll do really shallow things, have very ingenuine relationships with other people, whether it's friends, whether it's girlfriends, whatever it might be. And these people will have very ingenuine relationships. And then as a result, his view of the wealthy becomes staggered by this view of partying, of drinking all night, of jazz music. And The Great Gatsby is really the book, and even it turns into a movie that is used to help describe what F. Scott Fitzgerald thinks the wealthy are all about. Which is self-centered. The Flappers also took up this lost generation mindset, because obviously they feel disconnected at times, being women who have the opportunity to work, who are visually, changing the style of the 1920s from their looks with this whole flapper mindset. But and this Vincent Millay goes through this quote. You don't have to memorize it, but it kind of looks at the 1920s in general. So, my candle burns at both ends; it will not last the night. But all my foes and oh my friends, it gives a lovely light. So you're burning a candle on 2 different wicks. It's brighter than normal. However, it's going to last much shorter. So something to take a look at here as to what is going to use with the lost generation in terms of that. Now, the next one we look at is the Harlem Renaissance. The question I ask you is, again, how does jazz and literature kind of change the Harlem Renaissance? That's all well and good, but the question I'm looking at is how are African Americans perceiving this? What do they think about this new rebirth of their own culture and heritage? Many African Americans were and felt empowered because of this popularity. They drove through poetry, like you see Langston Hughes here, because of the music that many of them played in these clubs. Excuse me. There's music that they played in their clubs, and everything that we see that happens in music and culture and forms of expression in the 1920s is all driven by African Americans. Many of them believe that their heritage would enrich America, not conflict with it. There are a lot of people in the Harlem Renaissance, this is what we'll get into tomorrow's discussion when we read the article, that many people thought that many of these African American artists, the poets, the musicians, were were solidifying stereotypes of African Americans. Most white people thought that they were from Africa, the jungles of Africa. They didn't know much about civilized society, and their music and their artwork, perpetuated those stereotypes, meaning that they egged them along. There are some people in the African American circle that, like W.E.B. Du Bois, who are critics of this Renaissance, because W.E.B. Du Bois is fighting for political equality. His goal is, how is any white majority-based Congress going to give us equality if we keep perpetuating the stereotypes of us being an uncivilized group of people? And that's what many people thought the Harlem Renaissance was all about. That African Americans are showing their culture, and that people are buying into it. It's driving the popularity in terms of what's popular socially in the country. So, we're going to look more into this tomorrow, but the Harlem Renaissance, for many African Americans, was a way for them to be proud of their own heritage and not off of somebody else's, interpretations. They could care less if white people liked it or not. They just wanted to do what they wanted to do, and if white people liked it, great. If they didn't, oh well. That's a loss that they had. Well, we'll read more about this tomorrow with the Harlem Renaissance here at this point. But this is kind of all we got to. We went over this, and there's a video I have on Canvas as well. I'll show you actually right here. I'm gonna go over to Canvas. You can see on at the bottom, I have a video about the Harlem Renaissance, and again, we've finished our review, which you can download right here, and then you can get that. Get these answers for that from somebody else, or if you go from last week's discussion as well, you can get that. But again, look at the Harlem Renaissance, use that video, click on that, and you can take that moving forward and show how this music and how this culture and how this change of the 1920s mindset really pushes African Americans into the forefront of popularity. All right, everybody have a fantastic day. I will see you tomorrow.